When studying wild birds, sometimes it's necessary to catch them to take measurements and learn about the species. A federal permit is required to catch and band birds, and it's important to always keep the welfare of the bird as the top priority. To catch smaller songbirds, we usually use mist nets, which are set up between two tall poles. The nets are made up of a very fine mesh that is hard to see, and birds get caught in the net when they fly into it. We usually set up mist nets along a natural lane of clear vegetation so that it's easy for us to walk along the nets and check them for birds. When we've caught a bird, we carefully untangle them from the net and put them in cloth bird bags to keep them safe and calm while we finish checking the rest of the nets. I like to keep my bird bags in a little pouch that I carry across my shoulder. To minimize how long birds have to spend in the nets, we check the nets at least once every 30 minutes. This net had a male common yellowthroat in it, and he was pretty tangled up in the net. It takes a lot of practice to learn how to safely extract birds from mist nets and figure out the different strategies needed for different scenarios of tangled birds. This guide took me around 2 minutes to extract, and I've sped up the video here so you don't have to watch through all of that. More typically, the birds aren't very tangled, and it only takes a few seconds to get them out of the net safely. We usually hold the bird in a bander's grip, which safely supports the bird's wings so it doesn't get hurt from trying to escape, and also allows us to take measurements at the same time. Once we've checked all the nets, it's time to bring the birds back to the banding area. We process the birds one at a time while the other birds are safe in their bird bags. I like to feel for the bird in the bag before I open it up, just so that I can reduce the chances of the bird escaping from me. Since I'm right-handed, I usually hold the bird in my left hand so that I can use my right hand to do measurements and write down data. After we identify what species the bird is, the next thing to do is band it with a lightweight aluminum band that has a number engraved on it. Each band has a unique number so that if the bird is caught again in the future, we will know exactly where it came from and we can look up all the data relating to that bird. The bands are opened up with special banding pliers and then carefully closed around the thin part of the bird's leg. Once the band is on, I always like to check that the band is a good size for the bird and isn't too tight, and then I write down the band number on my datasheet. Here's another angle showing you how the band is put on the bird's leg. It's important to make sure that the band is closed all the way so that nothing will get stuck in it once the bird is free. For bigger birds, the process is the same, except we use bigger band sizes to fit around the bird's leg. I had to make sure I had a very firm grip on this catbird's leg while banding so that it wouldn't squirm and accidentally injure itself while I was putting the band on. If we don't know what size band to use, we can use a leg gauge to test out different diameters and determine the right fit for the bird. Once the bird is banded, there are a few measurements that we take. The length of the wing is measured using a ruler that has a stop at one end, and we place the stop at the wrist of the wing and measure to the longest flight feather. For the tail, we measure the length of the central tail feather. This catbird had a wing length of 85 millimeters and a tail length of 94 millimeters. Some less common measurements include measuring the leg and the bill. Here, I'm measuring the length of the tarsus bone on the leg using calipers. This palm warbler had a tarsus of 19.9 millimeters. I also measured the exposed culmen of this bird, which was 9.7 millimeters. And the exposed culmen is a measurement that tells me the length of the bill. Generally though, the wing and tail measurements are the most common, and here's an example of those measurements again on a swamp sparrow. This swamp sparrow had a wing length of 57 millimeters and a tail length of 59 millimeters. After all the measurements are taken, I move on to looking at the body condition of the bird. Birds have very thin and transparent skin, so by blowing the feathers apart, I can see the muscle and fat underneath. This bird had good muscle condition and not much fat, which is pretty typical for birds when they are in their wintering habitat. Usually, birds will have higher fat levels right before migrating to make sure they have enough energy to get back to their destination. Next up, I check the bird's feather condition, look for parasites, and determine the age of the bird. For juvenile and immature birds that were hatched this year, they usually have some lower quality feathers on the wing versus adult birds, which will have higher quality feathers because they were able to put more energy into growing their feathers. Sometimes the shape of the tail feathers can also be helpful to figure out what age a bird is, and younger birds tend to have more pointy tail feathers. Here's a close-up of the wing and tail of this palm warbler, which was an adult bird. Learning how to age birds is very tricky, and depending on the species, sometimes the differences between adult and juvenile bird feathers are very subtle. Luckily, gray catbirds are one of the easier species to determine the age for. When I look at the wing of this bird, I can see that most of the wing feathers have a brownish wash instead of being dark gray, which means that this bird is a juvenile that hatched earlier this year. On an adult gray catbird, all the feathers would be a dark gray color without any brown. A cool thing about catbirds is that we can look at the color of the inside of the mouth to figure out the age of the bird. After I let this bird bite my finger, I can hold its bill open and see that the roof of the mouth is pale pinkish yellow, meaning that it's a juvenile bird. And on an adult bird, the inside of the mouth would be totally black. There's a great reference book written by Peter Pyle that has measurements and descriptions for determining the age and sex of all the bird species in North America. Using Pyle, I was able to determine that this eastern meadowlark was a male and likely an adult. The last thing to do before letting the bird go is to weigh it. The birds go upside down in a little tube with their wings and legs tucked in so that they can't fly away. Smaller birds like palm warblers will need a smaller tube, otherwise they would be able to escape from the larger tube. Then, after being weighed, the birds are free to fly away. I also wanted to show you an example of how we put color bands on a bird. For certain projects that monitor populations of birds very closely, it's important to be able to identify each bird just by looking at it from afar. For many songbird projects, we do this by giving each bird a unique combination of colored plastic bands on their legs. They still get the aluminum bands with a unique number on it, and I like to start with this band first so that the bird is uniquely tagged just in case it gets away from me before I put the rest of the bands on. The plastic color bands are the same size as the aluminum bands, and we use these little spoon-shaped tools to help open the band and slide it onto the bird's leg. The plastic is a softer and more flexible material, so I can gently squeeze it shut using just my fingers. I repeat the same process with the other leg, and the sparrow now has 2 bands on each leg that forms a unique combination from every other sparrow in this population. This guy is red over aluminum on the left leg and gray over whites on the right leg. After color banding a bird, we also take all the typical measurements before letting them go. Here's a picture showing all the beautiful colors on the grasshopper sparrow's back that you don't usually get to see from very far away. Bye! See you later! After we're done banding birds for the day, it's time to pack up the mist nets. I picked out all the little twigs that were in the net so it wouldn't get tangled, and then I rolled the net up so that it would be easier to pack up into a bag. Until next time, thanks for watching.